how you use an add-on in Excel known as Solver. This is used to help you with some linear programming examples. So in this particular screen, because it's very much linked into the formulation of a problem, what I've done on the right hand side is I've given you a very, very basic problem which has then been formulated underneath. So this is about a cutlery manufacturer wanting to look at a production schedule for knives, forks and spoons. They've got various restrictions on them, so things like every item has to go through a filing and polishing process. There's only a certain amount of time available for that. They also have like a restriction on the amount of steel that's required in their manufacture, and you're given some values for that. And then also the profit that each item gets. Essentially, this particular problem is looking at how you would maximise profit. So I'm not going into detail about how it's formulated in this particular example, but you can see the formulation underneath on the right hand side, and I've put all of that into a text box on the side. Now, for using Solver, a lot of the preparation is in how you set the screen up in order to use it. So what you'll see here is I've got quite a number of bits of information already in. Some of it is optional, some of it is there just to help you understand how the Solver problem relates to the actual example itself, whereas other parts are required in order to use Solver properly. So here what I've done is you can see that I've just let K stand for the number of knives used, F for forks, S for spoons, and then on the very first column I've started to put some labels in just so I can understand. The very first thing I want to know is well, what mix would I get which would maximise my profit? And what you would normally do is you would start off with any kind of mix at all, just so that you can see that your initial equations are going to work. So it's standard to say have a look at producing 1 of each item or 10 of each item, because then you can check that when we actually put some formulas in, that you can see that the formulas are working as you would expect. So I'll come back to that in a bit. Then you'll see that what I've done is I've also put in things like profit, how much steel that each one uses, the filing time, the polishing time, and then the last 3, which are kind of optional nowadays in Solver. You used to really need to put them in, but sometimes you can do it without these in, or what would be known as the non-negativity constraints. That just makes sure that you do actually get some knives produced, because obviously a spreadsheet will just work on negative values as well as positive. So we have these here in for knives, forks and spoons. And I'll explain what those values mean in a moment. Then on the right hand side you'll see that I've got a column which says current value, another column that talks about a symbol, a column that says right hand side value, and then a final column which gives you the units. Again, column H is purely optional. I've put that in simply because we've got mixtures of units in there, so although we've got a total of hours available, we're told that each fork requires 8 minutes of filing, for instance. So I've just made sure I've converted them so that all of the units are standard across, and I just thought it was worthwhile just having a column in there so I understood what I was dealing with. The right hand side value in column G is actually, it's not a very good label, but there's no good label to give it. It makes a bit more sense in this particular example, but other examples you think, I don't understand why that's there, but again I'll come back to that in a moment. So if I go back over to the left hand side, you'll note that when I've formulated the problem underneath, you can see that against each of the letters, I'm saying that the profit comes from, if you produce 10 knives, you get 30p per knife, so that's where the 0.3k comes from. Same for the forks, same for the spoons, but they're worth 20 pence each. And then the idea is your overall profit would just be how many knives you've produced times by the 30 pence. Forks, number of forks you produced times by 30 pence, added on to that, and then the number of spoons you produced times by 20 pence, added on to that. That's the same for the actual constraints themselves. The only difference being, in this particular case, what we're looking for is the fact that yes, each knife would take a certain amount of time, a certain amount of steel in its manufacture, but we've only got a limited amount available. So this is where the symbols come into play, where we're saying that we don't have to use up all the steel that we've got available for this production mix. but we cannot use any more than 120. You can not use any more than 12 kilograms, which if you times that by 1,000 comes out as 12,000 grams. Same for the filing time and the polishing time. So you can see I've just done those calculations for you there. And these are what we put in as the right hand side values, those there. Okay, over here, right in the beginning of the table, what we're really doing is we're actually typing in the value which is next to the letter. So for profit, 0.3 against K. For the steel, we've got 5 against F. And then if we have a look at the polishing for spoons, we've got 4 written against the S. So we just place those values in there. For the non-negativity ones, because it's just K by itself, it's like saying you've got one lot of K, one lot of F, one lot of S. So we just put the values 1 in there. You can put zeros in if you want around the other ones, or you can just leave them blank. Again, you can see that what I've done is I've entered all the symbols into a column, but where it says current value, that's blank at the moment, because we are going to actually have to put some formulas in there. And the formulas that are going to go in there are actually going to tell us that if we did make one of each, what profit would we get? How much steel would we use up? How much filing time? How much polishing time? So we'll get on with doing that at the moment by constructing the formula. So I'm just going to click in E3, where I need my first formula, and I'm literally going to start constructing the equation exactly like it has over here underneath max profit. So I'm just saying that start off with an equals to tell it I'm doing a formula, and what I'm going to do is I've taken the 0.3, and that's going to be multiplied by how many knives I make. I'm going to add to that 0.3 times by how many forks I make, plus 0.2 times by how many spoons I make. Okay, and then hopefully you should see that that should come out to 0.8. If I'm just making one of each, it's 0.3 plus 0.3 plus 0.2, like so. Okay, now I just have to repeat the process for all of these equations to do exactly the same thing. But I'm going to actually go back and do this profit one again, because instead of me having to go in and doing each formula manually, I could actually put a shortcut in which would allow us just to copy it down and it work it out automatically. So I'm just going to get rid of the value in there, okay, so it doesn't confuse things. Click back in it, and again go through the formula, but I'm going to make a slight change this time. So I'll start off with the equals in exactly the same way as I did before. Click on the 0.3 and say multiply by how many knives I make, which happens to be in the cell B2. Now when I am going to do the steel equation, it would be 6 times 1. For filing, it would be 6 times 1, and so on. So that value of 1 is not going to change at all, right, for these equations. So what I could do is I could fix the cell reference by pressing F4. So it tells me that if I copy this formula anywhere, then it will still go back and pick up the value in B2, which happens to be the number of knives I'm making. So I just have to do this for each of the different values. So 0.3 times by the number of forks that I'm going to make. That is actually going to stay fixed for these particular equations. So I can press the F4 key, or you could type the dollar signs in for yourself. There's other videos that tell you about fixed cell referencing. And then for the final part, it's the 0.2 times by the number of spoons I'm making, which again, right, I want that to stay the same, so I press the F4 key. Now when I press return, we're going to get exactly the same of 0.8. Okay, however, now because I've fixed these values of 1, 1, 1, when I copy that formula down, it will actually work it out for all of those constraints all at once. So you can see for the steel, you would have imagined that all those values would be added up if you make one each. Yes, 14.5, and so on. So there we've got our basic sort of like tabulation ready and waiting before we can use Solver. Now Solver itself, right, is found underneath the data menu, and right at the very end there's like a little addition where underneath the menu called analysis called solver. It may or may not be there. Okay, what we'll do is we'll look in the workshop sessions about how you can add that in if it isn't already there for you. Kind of like disappear with updates and things like that, but we'll go through that in the workshops. So all we do is when we select solver, just click on the button and a new screen will come up. I'm just going to move this slightly just so that it doesn't cover up the problem itself. And you can see that it's asking you to put in quite a lot of information. We have the objective at the top. We have the options. Do we want to maximise, minimise it, or set it to a particular value? What do we want to do this by? So in other words, what are the values that we want to change and look at the different options for? And then the constraints. So what is it that is going to stop us from, if we're making a profit, we could just make as many as we wanted, but obviously there are resources that would stop us from doing that, and they're known as the constraints. So let's have a look at how you put all of this information in. Well, the objective, so in other words, that will be the cell where you actually work out, in this case, the profit. So I'd put my formula in for working out the profit into cell E3. Okay, so just click at that particular cell and it'll enter it into the menu. What we're going to do, we want to maximise that. That option's already set, so I don't have to do anything. And I'm going to do it by changing the number of knives, forks and spoons that I produce. So again, click on the box where it says by changing variable cells, and just go across and highlight 3 boxes where we're looking at the number of knives, forks and spoons produced. And again, it'll put that in to the actual menu for yourself. Then the next one underneath is subject to the constraints. Well, we've got multiple constraints here, so what we're going to do is we're going to add them in one at a time. And the main area that we're interested in here, this is why we've got the current value, so in other words, how much we're using if we did make one of each, and the right hand side value, so in this case, what maximums have we got available to us. So we're going to have to put 6 constraints in altogether. So I'm just going to start that by clicking on add, and it gives you another little mini menu, and it's very simple because all it wants you to do is say, well, where are you working out the value at the moment? So at the moment, the amount of steel I'm using is in E4. I need that to be less than or equal to, so again, that comes up as default. And then you want to tell it what the maximum you've got if it's less than or equal to available. So that would be the right hand side value. Oops, sorry. Go back. Forgot to click in the box of the 1200. Okay, so just saying that 14.5 has always got to be less than 12,000. Right, so at this point I could click on OK and it'll take me back to the main menu. Or, right, I'm going to go add one in again. You can see I could have just carried on adding them and adding them, save going back and forth, and that's what I'll do from now on. So for the next constraint, well, that's to do with the filing time. So I'm just clicking that I'm using up 18 minutes of filing at the moment, and I want to make sure that that remains less than or equal to the 14,400. So click on that cell. I'm now going to just say I'll look at my next one. So I'll add the next one in, and this time I'll look at polishing. So I've got 13 minutes of polishing at the moment, and I want to make sure that that's still less than or equal to 10,200. I'll add in the next constraint. These are the non-negativity ones, and sometimes you'll have constraints that are like this anyway. So it seems a bit strange, but what I'm doing is saying I'm making 1 knife at the moment, and I want to make sure that this is always greater than or equal to, so change the symbol, 0. Okay, so just click on the 0. And then if I just very quickly add the last couple in, so I'm just doing non-negativity for the forks, and the last one, do that again for the spoons. Okay, and you can see that it lists them all for you in the box. Okay, so you can again double check yourself, make sure you haven't missed anything. The only last thing that you need to do is it will ask you to select a solving method. Now actually it doesn't really matter which one you pick, but usually, just to be on the safe side, pick Simplex LP. You don't need to know the reasons why, just pick that one. And then, literally the last thing is you just have to say solve. Okay, and what it will do is it's going to try almost automatically all sorts of different production mixes and compare and contrast them till it finds the best one. So if I click on solve, it does give you the next menu, and without realising it you won't have noticed it, but if we just look to the left hand side you can see that all the values have changed instantly. Well, this is the solution that Solver is giving you. It's saying that in order to maximise profit you should make 1056 knives, 696 forks and 624 spoons. Right. You could keep that, or you could restore it back to the 111 that you started off with. So obviously we would normally keep that by just clicking on OK, and it's giving you the actual solution to the problem. So it's saying that you would make that number of knives, forks and spoons, and this would give you a profit of £650 and 40 pence. Okay? So that gives you the basics of how you use Solver.